Welcome, welcome, folks.
Hello.
Welcome, welcome.
We're back with a guest today.
Yeah.
And in a moment, we're going to allow our guest and request that our guest introduce himself and share with you some really, really, really great news
For the Second Amendment.
for people, for the
Yes.
Second Amendment, for people across this wonderful nation, across America. So we have a guest today who recently had a Second Amendment win, huge win.
A huge win. And it here on Massachusetts, which is where it all
Yes.
began and where it's going to, once again, now in this century, in this day, it is going to begin again.
Yeah, I think this
I
is
hope so.
this
Yeah.
is perfect. That just gave me goosebumps.
Yes, it gave me goosebumps too.
We will Bear, have you talk about your situation, introduce yourself, talk about your situation. We'll ask you a couple questions. And then when you're done, Ken's and I are going to talk about the differences between your situation and American state nationals, because this channel is mostly geared towards American state nationals and towards living in a sovereign way across multiple dimensions and areas and arenas in people's lives. So the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, right? That's sort of what we're encompassing. And so why don't you now introduce yourself for our audience, please? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Kang, and for the last about 5 years, I've been basically fighting a gun charge in Massachusetts, a victimless regulatory crime, essentially. And recently I did win, like, completely. So let me just give you the rundown, the basic story. I'm a citizen of New Hampshire, to be distinguished from a citizen of the United States. And I traveled to my own property in Westfield, Massachusetts, where my son and I went on to our own farm. We have a 22-acre farm out there, and we were shooting a 22 caliber pistol at a target. And unbeknownst to us, there was a trespasser who had come from somewhere else. He was probably a drug dealer or whatever, but he was enjoying my property, like on my land, taking a swim along my side of the property on the river. And he came up and he said to me, "Well, you can't shoot here." I'm like, "Really? What do you mean I can't shoot it? This is my property. Get out of here, right?" So he basically left, and he called the cops, and he said to them, "Well, there's a man and a little boy shooting out in the woods here." And the cops said, "Okay, well, we'll send somebody to investigate." So when the cops arrived, three of them came up. He told the cops that I pointed a gun at him and told him to get off my property. So that was his first problem, is he bore false witness against me. And of course the cops did what cops do. They searched my car and they got out, they found the guns and everything. And at that point I was charged with five felonies. I mean, five charges, four felonies, one misdemeanor. There was two gun charges, which are both felonies, a large capacity feeding device charge, which is a mandatory 2.5 year jail sentence, also a felony, an assault with a dangerous weapon, right? Because I allegedly assaulted someone, and also having ammunition without a license. Um, that went to the district court, and then that became an indictment and went to the Superior Court in Hampden County, Massachusetts. At that time, I was basically put into a situation where I had to basically study or go to jail, right? So I chose to study. I spent every day waking up at like 6 a.m. and studying until like 10 p.m., whatever. I probably spent more time studying this issue than I would have just, gone straight to jail. If I had pleaded out, they would have given me 18 months, and that would have been that.
So
Um,
what did you do before this, Bear? What was your history? Like
oh,
studying new for you? What did you do?
What do you mean? What do I do?
Like,
In
like,
terms,
how did you begin when you say you just dove into studying?
oh, okay, yeah. So fortunately, I did have some prior experience.
Okay.
Um, and that came from studying things like the motor vehicle regulations and studying the tax code. So it wasn't like I didn't go from zero to wherever I was, but it was still a lot of studying. Now, I have known for a long time that words mean things, and carrying a firearm is not the same thing as bearing arms. And if we look into the law and really study what the meaning of the words are, we realize that the word carrying a firearm, carrying means to carry out the obligations of the state. It means to carry on the will of the people in the Constitution. It means to carry for hire or for a reward. It means to carry in the course of a business. It means to carry in the performance of duties to serve the public, like if you're a police officer carrying a weapon, right?
Yep.
And it also means to carry out the commission of a crime. So carry is a very, very dangerous word. And every time you use it, you step into their juristic loop. Yeah,
Mm.
snare, their snare. And so that's one thing that is extremely important. And the other thing that's extremely important is that the word firearm, at least in Massachusetts and probably many other states, is defined not with respect to its physical um, attributes, but rather how it's used. Because the way it's defined in chapter 140, 121, a firearm is defined as used in a certain section of the code. And what I had to do was I had to search every single a word firearm in the entire code, and I found 43 firearms that are contemplated in the Massachusetts general laws. And they're all used, as I was saying, as like a gunsmith carrying out a business, as a police officer carrying on the duties of public service, as a criminal carrying out the commission of a crime. And so it's very important that the word firearm is also related to the word carry, because carry is what the firearm is used for. And then finally, there's a contrasting word, which is bearing arms, right?
Which
That's a
is in the Constitution.
constitutional right.
Right.
So
So,
that's the difference.
right, that's the main difference. One, carrying a firearm is a statutory entitlement. And in one of the Massachusetts law, Supreme Court decisions, Massachusetts now, the word entitlement is equal to the word privilege.
Right.
The word privilege, if you look at the Massachusetts Constitution, Article 6 says no person shall have any other privileges except for the consideration which he renders to the public. So if you get a privilege, you're privileged to carry a firearm in the service of the public.
Right.
It is a privilege on top of a right that you already have. And that's the thing that they're licensing, and that's the thing that you have to parse out. You have to differentiate. And let's see, where was I? So that's the privilege part.
Mm.
So basically, let's see. So those are the main kind of words that we have to understand. The other thing we have to understand is jurisdiction, right? There's two jurisdictions here. The first is a judicial jurisdiction. That's the jurisdiction of common law crimes. So if I beat somebody up, that's a common law crime. It's a party, it's two parties, two private property parties having an issue with each other. And it's resolved by a third impartial, free and independent judge called the judiciary, and they resolve private party disputes. So in my case, the alleged assault with dangerous weapon is a judicial um is a justiciable under a court of law.
Mhm.
I think you're muted. I'm not sure.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go.
okay.
Yeah. So but the other four charges are known as regulatory charges because they're quote unquote passive and victimless. That's the important part. If you're in a situation where you did something which is passive and victimless, and it's a regulatory crime, then you're in a completely different jurisdiction. And that jurisdiction is the administrative jurisdiction, or the Article 2 jurisdiction, right? So our government is divided into 3, maybe 4 articles, right? Article 1 is the legislative. Article 2 is the administrative or the executive branch, and Article 3 is the judicial branch. And the article they don't talk about is we the people branch. That's Article 1. I mean Article 0 rather. And that's where the jury is. That's the jury sits on the Article 0 side of things. So with a regulatory crime is a violation of a commercial or professional licensing issue. For example, if you're a doctor and you practice medicine without a license, right? The medical board will summon you to their jurisdiction and bring you before a court. And that's how they adjudicate the matters of a licensing licensing issue. That's the same thing as if you go to traffic court and you have to deal with driving without a license. Now, the problem with that is, unlike the medical license thing where the medical board is not present, neither the Department of Motor Vehicles nor the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security are present in so-called motor vehicle court, or in my case, gun court. Okay, because these regulatory things that deal with licensing, regulation of gun licensing, is under the jurisdiction in Massachusetts, under the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. They're the ones that issue you the license. They're the ones that do the background check. They're the ones that do the fingerprinting and accept the fees and so forth. Which leads me to my next point, which is if you look up the laws that require you to pay the licensing fee and everything, you'll find certain words that come up repeatedly. Like you look up how do I get a license in Massachusetts? You'll see you will need to pay $100 to the licensing authority. Okay. And you'll keep repeatedly seeing that word. And so you look up the word licensing authority, and first you'll see that a licensing authority is your town police chief or the colonel of the state police. But in another law, I believe it's actually, let me get to that. So in another law, I believe it's well, anyway, let's just forget about that for the moment. I think it Mass General Laws Chapter 6, Section 176N, as in November. But anyway, a licensing authority is any person or a board with the authority to issue professional licenses or to impose a professional fee on an occupation. Okay.
Now, this is definitely in the course of a job.
Right. That's
So
why
it's built right in the language itself.
Right.
And so what happened? Like, take us through the process of what you went through, because you went through an awful lot.
Yes.
You were relentlessly like hammered.
Right.
And you just kept coming back. You kept coming back. So tell us about that battle.
All right. So first of all, I will say that because it was obviously my first time in criminal court like this, I made a lot of mistakes. There's no doubt about it. Okay. But that being said, I can also tell you in retrospect, the judges don't make mistakes. They do respect the Constitution. They will listen to you if you do the right things, if you do cite the right laws. But you have to do it extremely on point, and it's got to be exactly what you're looking for them to do.
So specificity is key.
It's exactly key.
Just
You
like
have to
what
look
you
up a
said.
law for everything.
And when you said that you looked up what are firearms and you found specific examples of firearms that are covered, again, that speaks to specificity. So all of this it's very, very crucial for people to comprehend that specificity is important, because we have been indoctrinated through the years to dismiss, oh, that doesn't matter. What the words that were said doesn't matter. It's the meaning behind it. That's not true. And what you have lived through is a perfect example to
Yeah.
show that that is not true.
Yeah. If you use the wrong word,
Right.
if you use the wrong word in court, they will use that against you. So yeah,
Right.
so like here's what attorneys do. There's a couple of strategies that they use. The first is called a category error. And what that means is it's called an informal logical fallacy. And if you look that up, informal logical fallacy, there's a whole list of them, and they all go through that in law school. They learn what those informal logical fallacies are. And one of them is called the category error, where they take two things, for example, the word carry and the word bear, and then they mix them. They call it one, right? They do not distinguish between carrying and bearing. That makes it impossible for you to fight the offense, because you're saying, hey, I want to carry a gun. But in your mind, you're like, that's a constitutional right. But in their mind, it's, oh, that's a privilege that we get to license. And if you don't separate those according to the category error and call it out and say, Your Honor, listen, there's a category error here. It's an informal logical fallacy. And here's what the meaning of the words are. And here's why it's important we distinguish them. If you don't do that, they will not give you credit. Even more importantly, in my situation, I tried to do that. However, I couldn't figure out the way to bring it up. That's to bring it into evidence, to bring it in front of the jurors, and they wouldn't let me do that. All right. And in fact, when I went to trial, that day when I went to trial, sorry. When the day when I went to trial, I had a number of defenses which they would not allow me to use because I didn't bring it up the right way, which was extremely dangerous at the time. Now, I got lucky at the end. I'll tell you how I got out of that, but I got lucky, but it was something that I was this close to going to jail. So that's the first thing, is category error. The second thing they use is homonyms. Homonyms are words that are the same word but used in different meanings. So the word firearm is a homonym, and a firearm means one of three things. One, it is a species of arms protected and secured by the text and history of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Two, is a firearm described in the statute to mean one of 43 different things which have to do with a certain profession or a certain activity regulable under the state. Okay. And then three, there are firearms that are described as hunting implements in the Massachusetts general laws. So in criminal law, the word firearm means only pistols. Okay. Short guns with 16-inch or less barrels. Under the hunting and fishing chapter in Massachusetts, it's a firearm is a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol, or a revolver, or any device that fires using mechanical or air power. Okay, so that's chapter 131. So because they use the word firearms interchangeably and they don't specify which of those three firearms that you have, they use that against you. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, let's talk about that licensing thing. I'm looking at the law now because I just pulled it up. But a licensing authority is an agency, an examining board, a credential board with the authority to impose occupational fees or licensing requirements on a profession. That's Mass General Laws, Chapter 6, Section 172, N as in November. All right, that's extremely important. And the other thing we know is the thing with the steps that are required to get your license.
So that to me feels like entrapment, because now anytime that anybody thinks they're following the law and they get a license, what getting that license implies is that they're utilizing it for work and to be of service to the people.
That's true, but see, we the people created these laws in theory, right? We are the
theory.
masters, we are the masters of our government. We are the masters of the machine that helps to take care of us. So if we don't understand the gears of that machine and it fucking steps on us, it's on us. You see what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
So you have to know this stuff if you want to, if you want freedom and control over the government that purports to control you, you have to know their stuff better than they do. And so along those lines, the other thing with licensing is, you have to get a background check, right? So we looked up the background check, and that's the regulation under 803 CMR 2.01. And the purpose and scope of the licensing of the background check for getting a license is for volunteer opportunities, employment, and professional licensing. It
So
doesn't
that
say,
reinforces it. So that actually reinforces it. So
yes,
each step of the way that you consent to, by going
yes,
through this process, you are digging your own hole a little deeper.
correct.
And
Yeah,
so
I mean,
do you
yeah,
think police know that any of these nuances, or have they
absolutely not.
been trained that
No,
everyone requires a license, and if they don't have a license, they're breaking the law and the police they have free reign?
the police do not know at all. In fact, the prosecutor doesn't know. The attorneys of the state don't know. I can tell you that as a matter of fact, because when I brought them this stuff, they were completely like, just it was a left field. They absolutely did not expect it. Um, and so anyway, that's the law for excuse me, that was the law for background checks. And then the other law is for fingerprints. And that law is at chapter 6, section 172 B and a half. That's B.5, B and a half. You have to look that up. But
Yeah.
basically, the licensing, the fingerprinting is for those in quote specified occupations. Specified occupations. So of the three things that you do to get the license, one, you pay the money, the $100. Two, the licensing authority, and the licensing authority is the one who has the right to impose an occupational fee or a licensing requirement on a profession. Two, you submit to a background check, and that's one for professional licensing, volunteers, and employment. Okay. And then three, when you do your fingerprinting, that's one that's for those in specified occupations. So there you have it. That makes it a professional license. And it does not apply to anybody.
No,
And,
but it's
well,
applied with a broad brush
yeah,
against everyone.
yeah,
So you think that is the most important thing for people to take away from like really comprehending
well,
specifically the specificity of
yeah,
all
for
of
sure.
those tenants?
For sure. They don't see the law is written not to, as in a way not to make mistakes or be unconstitutional in any way. Because if they are unconstitutional or if they make a mistake, they can be subject to personal, lawsuits. And the judges don't want that. They do believe, I mean, they do obey the law. That doesn't mean that they're not going to try to screw you at every angle, but that does mean that if you do everything right, then you probably will get out of it. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Now, as far as so this is some of the basic stuff that I've learned. And the other thing is a lot of people have said, well, don't we want people to have a background check? We don't want other people to run around with all these dangerous weapons without a background check, right? And in theory, that sounds plausible. It sounds plausible. But here's my argument against that. You have a background check, for example, for people who take care of children, right? They're called child care workers. They take care of children, they run daycares. You drop off your children in their daycare, you go to work, you come back, you expect your children to be sound and safe, right? Those people need to get a license. Wouldn't you agree? And those people need to be background checked. Because what they are doing is serving the public, and they're receiving a privilege for the service of their public, and that's the license that they get. On the other hand, if you're a parent there is no such thing as a license to parent. Correct? Obviously. Now, that means the same thing as with arms. You have a right to defend your own body and your own life and property with arms if necessary. Even
Yep.
if you're a convicted felon who's, come out of jail, right? But if you want to get a license to carry, that means you're serving the public. That means
Right.
I can hire you up and say, listen, I'm going on vacation. Watch my house and guard my stuff for the next 2 weeks. And you better believe I want you to be licensed, number one, and I want you to be background checked. So I have confidence that when I come back, my stuff is still there, my property is still safe.
I'm sorry, the irony of the obfuscation in the examples that you're using because of what we know about child trafficking and who's mostly responsible, and what we know about the de facto jurisdiction and the fraud and the obfuscation that is used in terms of how American state nationals view things. It's just ironic to me that if you follow the letter of the law in specificity, that the judges will honor that. They have to, because that's their rules and regulations, right? But the way that it's carried out is almost impossible unless someone has the time and the mental acuity to comprehend those rules and regulations, know where to look. It's just like it really became your life.
It did.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
years.
I mean,
got-
everyone knows you as Bear.
Right.
I
I'm
mean, your
bearing
real
arms,
name
right?
is Kang.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I go by bear arms because bearing arms is what I did and what
Yep.
I'm doing. And every time someone says, "Oh, I want to carry concealed, I want da da da," no, I'm telling you that's going to get you into a lot of trouble. So, for example, if you're carrying concealed, why don't you just say that you're bearing arms undercover? I mean, you're covering and bearing arms, right? Concealment, if you look it up in the law dictionary, it's a bad thing. You don't want to conceal something.
Hiding,
Yeah,
right.
you're
It
hiding.
means you're hiding, you're concealing a crime, you're concealing a fraud, you're concealing theft or whatever, right? So concealment is not a word you want to use, and carrying is not a word you want to use unless you know what you're using it for, which is for a reward or for profit or some kind of money.
Yeah.
And when you're and so yeah. So the other thing I want to just go tell your audience is, listen, if you don't have a gun license, here's what I would suggest you do.
Okay,
Uh,
good.
all right. On your gun, go to the engraver and tell him to write down jury nullification, the right, or rather the power to decide right v wrong. I've got that tattooed to my gun, okay? Jury nullification, power to decide right v wrong.
Yep.
Because I can guarantee you that your prosecutor is going to think twice about taking you to trial. Because when that goes into evidence, the jury will now have to read about jury nullification and whether the thing you did was right or wrong, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. And a jury is a powerful group of people, and they are Article 0, we the people, and they get to overrule anything and everything that the judge says, right? I mean, if you go to court, you watch them call all rise. They only do that for the jury and the judge. And when the jury walks in, the judge stands up, right? I see that in court because the jury is the most powerful group of people in that courtroom. They are Article 0, and they control everything in that courtroom as far as a decision is concerned. If they decide that you're not guilty, they can decide that against any instruction or law that the judge wants to give them.
Right.
You have to allow them to do that. So on any property, especially the ones that could get you in trouble, like an arm for personal use. Okay.
Uh-huh.
An arm for personal use. That's what I'm talking about. Tattoo that on your arm for personal use. And if you're in Massachusetts, I would suggest another tattoo or engraving, which is MGL 62 C as in Charlie, dash 55 A as in Alpha, arms for personal use. And arms for personal use is a species of arms that are secured by the Constitution and in their own laws are allowed to be kept along with your food, your fuel, your furniture, your tools, your books, your equipment, I mean your household utensils. And look up that law.
Right. And this isn't,
62C
and
55A.
doing that wouldn't assist people who are utilizing weaponry to harm others or
Yeah.
to do unlawful and illegal things.
Right.
Those
Yes.
those engravings are not going to assist them in getting
No.
away with
Mm-mm.
doing
Absolutely
something
not.
to harm another.
Yeah, because
Because then they're actually more responsible.
Yeah,
right. Because look, if you're gonna do something in this life, do it in a way that you wouldn't be ashamed of walking in front of 12 random people and having them judge whether you go to jail or do something,
yeah.
like when I went to trial, I knew that the issue of assault with a dangerous weapon was just the way that the prosecutor wanted to use in order to bring in the firearms because they were now alleged to be used in a crime. You see what
Right.
I mean? If it was a completely regulatory offense, I would have had I could have had used different means of defending myself. See what I mean?
Yep.
So in retrospect, if you were going to, suggest to someone who wants to, on their property, show someone or practice, right? Shooting practice. If you're wanting to do that on your property, what would you recommend to somebody that they keep in the forefront of their mind to pull out in case someone is trespassing or walking across their property and does the same thing? If you had to go through the whole thing over again,
Yeah, well,
to people? And just before you answer that, Bear, I wanna just note the time, and because we have a little bit of limited time, we're obviously gonna ask if you wouldn't mind coming back.
Sure.
And then hopefully people, if they have specific questions, we'll put them below the video. They'll ask questions and we can ask you those questions when you come back,
Right.
if you don't mind.
So,
We want to reference
absolutely.
also your case because you shared that it's Kang Lu versus Commonwealth.
It's Commonwealth versus Kang Lu.
Commonwealth versus Kang Lu. Lu
Yeah.
Kang. Love
Lu
it.
Kang Lu, yeah, either way. But I'll tell you what, I got one even better. I will send you a link of a book that I wrote, and it's on a Google file or Google Drive, and you'll see the whole thing, everything I wrote about the law in this regard. You'll see all the laws that I talked about and so forth.
That's perfect.
And you'll find ways to get to all the meanings of the current court cases that are still ongoing. All
Okay.
right. There's
Right.
one that's ongoing in New Hampshire with a representative there. So
And this has
and
national implications too, does it not?
it does. So here's the thing about the implications of my case, and unfortunately it's limited to just my case. And although people can learn things from what I've done, it's not going to free like everybody unless everybody starts engraving these things on their arms for personal use in Massachusetts. Okay. And by the way, besides that, there's a law that says the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution says the judicial and legislative acts of every state shall be recognized in every other state. So that law, the Massachusetts general law that I just mentioned, is just as good in California as it is here if you use that law. And I would look up 18 or 28 United States code and then type in full faith and credit and it'll come up. It'll come up with a number and you can read about it. Full faith and credit is also talked about in Article 4 of the Constitution. Just look those up. Now to answer your question, what I would have done differently, I want to go with a more generic answer, and that is, first of all, what I've done is a little bit over the top as far as self-defense. It doesn't happen with most people. I can guarantee you that. For most people, you're going to get an attorney. And most attorneys, in fact, all attorneys, they're never going to argue the Second Amendment, guaranteed. All right. They're not going to argue it. But what they will argue is the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So from what I've learned, here's what you got to do with your arms for personal use. First of all, like I said, tattoo those things on your gun, jury nullification and arms for personal use. Secondly, make sure that they're in a locked box with a combination lock. And that combination lock saves you, because if you give them the combination before they Mirandize you, that can be thrown out under the Fifth Amendment. And also the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. So lock them in a box. That's kind of like cover, and then also conceal them, right? Cover them with like a brown paper bag or something in your car, so that the cops don't like automatically recognize your property as weapons or arms, and then they'll be less likely to search and seize your arms. That's the one that's gonna generally save you because of suppression in a court, and that means suppression of evidence by an attorney. The next thing is, if you're gonna do this yourself, right, you have to look at Rule 14 of the criminal procedure and look for the part that says statutory affirmative defenses, notice of statutory affirmative defenses. And you have to give notice to the court of all the statutes that you're going to use in order to defend yourself. Otherwise, you will not be allowed to use any of those defenses.
So that's where that's found. All right.
That's
So
where, yeah.
And is that mostly where you feel like you would do things differently because you didn't
Yes.
do that?
I didn't do that because I didn't know.
Right,
And-
you did your research during the process, but because you
Yeah.
didn't do them
Up front.
you couldn't use it.
Right.
That's just
Wow.
insane.
You were
That's
up
insane.
against so much, and I
Yeah.
mean, you've done so much. This is just really a
Yeah. Now, the reason that I still beat my case is there's two. One, I did not use an attorney, all right, because I knew they were not going to litigate as well for me. And two, regardless how bad I was in court, I can tell you, because I selected my own jurors and because they saw me as not a bad man,
Mhm.
they gave me every opportunity to make whatever mistakes, and they just didn't care. And even if I was not able to use any of my defenses, they still threw it out. Okay, even though I wasn't, and that's because they gave me the benefit of doubt in like just about everything. They really gave it to me. And in the end, what happened, I'll tell you what happened that beat the case. In the end, it was a matter of, did I possess or did I not possess this thing? And I read the judge's jury instructions very carefully, and I realized that possession of an object requires three elements. First is you have to have physical control over it. Second, you have to have intent to physically control it. And third, you have to have knowledge of the thing being present. So I told the jurors, I held up a glass of water, right? There's a glass of water. And I said, I possess this glass of water because I know it's there. I have the intention to hold it in my hands. And more importantly, I have the ability to control it because it's in a vessel. I possess a pencil because I have it in my fingertips and I can use it and I direct it in the proper way. And on the other hand, when the police came and they arrested me, I had handcuffs. I had them behind my back. I knew they were there. I had every intention to get out of them, but I couldn't. So that did not satisfy one of the three criteria. And that's why no sane person would say, hey, this guy's in handcuffs, therefore he possesses the handcuffs, right? You wouldn't say I possess the handcuffs.
Right.
So because my guns were in a locked box, I submit to the jurors that yes, I knew they were there, number one. Number two, but I didn't have the intention to get into them because they were obviously locked, right? And number three, even if I could get to that box, I couldn't really control it by just holding on to the box. I didn't possess the ability to, say, control water. Because the moment I spill water, for example, I no longer control it, even though I can have the intent and, so I gave him those three elements and the jury said, all right, good. They acquitted me on those. So again, if you're going to do this, the jury is your best friend, unless you did something really stupid, in which case they're going to be your worst enemy.
So I have a question, and
Yeah.
maybe this is really elementary and
Sure.
a tangent, but
Yeah.
how do you feel you were able to select a jury of your peers? Is it
Yeah.
because you were present during jury selection, or because
Yeah.
you said, I'm representing myself and I want the ability to choose who's coming in?
You get to choose your jurors as they walk before you, and as you talk to them, you get to unselect or
Right.
preempt the jurors, up to like 6 of them, I believe, 6 or 8. And so does the Commonwealth. And here's what happened in my case. I'll tell you what you should and shouldn't do from my very limited one-time experience. Okay. So when the jurors came in, I asked them, do you own private property? And some other question, are you employed? And basically, are you able to take care of yourself? And are you a self ownership kind of person? And the other and so one juror came up and said, yeah, I own farmland, and yeah, I shoot guns, and da da da. And I was like, great, this guy is what one when I want my jury. But I showed my enthusiasm a little bit too much, and that's when the Commonwealth said, no, we don't want him. So get him off the juror list. So you want to come up with maybe 3 questions at most which pertain to your case, which you think the jurors which will allow you to select the jurors.
Okay.
And then try not to show your emotions if you get a good one. And on the other hand, just preempt the ones that you don't want. And also look through the jury list, because I want to say a third of them has come from the state itself. That is, they're the husbands or wives of people who work for the state, such as the DMV or the police, the state police, or so forth. So a lot of them are state actors in a way, even though they're not really, state
So,
person.
and that's to eliminate them?
No, I'm saying the entire jury pool is tainted. Okay, I'm telling you
Because
that.
so many people work for the state.
Because yes, so you have to
Huge
select.
amount of people, it's like
Right.
10% or more of the population.
At least a third of them in the pile of papers that I received that morning
Mhm.
had some relation to the state, like their husbands or wives or whatever.
Yep.
And those guys, I mean, they're not necessarily bad, but you just want the
No,
normal.
but they're biased.
Right. They are in a way biased.
Because there's a conflict of interest.
Well, I mean, not technically, but it's not technically a conflict of interest, but there's certainly some level of bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's more like the state selects certain groups of people because they feel like they'll get a better deal out of it. That's
Okay.
basically how it goes.
Okay, so we've been on for just under 50 minutes.
Oh.
And so I would love to just sort of wrap this up. I want to say
Sure.
thank you again
Yes,
for
thank
coming
you.
on so much. We definitely would love to have you back. I don't know if this is a good time, for you. This is a
Yes.
good time for me.
Yeah, me
We
too.
may be able to do this again next week at this time. So so thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
Next time we would love to get into, how people across America might be able to utilize this.
Yep.
Even though you said it's applicable, right? It's applicable because the laws as they're written transfer.
Yep.
And so so that's one, but to get into more details and then to hopefully answer questions that people ask in the chat
Yeah.
down in the comment section.
Yeah, that would be great.
And then it'll give us a chance to come up with some questions specific to you, now that we have a little bit more information about the journey that you've gone over representing yourself in the last several years.
Yeah, that's a journey, all right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
quite. So
Wow.
congratulations again.
Congratulations.
Congratulations again.
Right.
And we will talk to you again soon.
All right.
Well, have your audience see the link in the below. I'm gonna send it to you, and you can post it, and they can read all about that stuff.
Fabulous.
Perfect. Thank
Fabulous.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. So Kenzie and I are going to stay on for just a couple minutes.
All right.
We are going to talk about a little bit of the difference between what you shared with us and American State Nationals, very brief.
Okay. Yep.
in the way that we comprehend it.
Yeah.
And we're going to utilize this opportunity to learn a little bit more about further differences that will benefit everybody.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
inviting me.
you so much. Be
Okay,
well.
take care. Yep. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so we're still recording.
Yep.
Wow, that was, he just is glowing.
Yes, he is.
And that is, I'm so psyched for him. I am so psyched for him. First off, the thing that I was thinking about, the immediate noticeable differences are the assumption that if you do have the specificity, that the system and the de facto courts are working for you. That's an assumption that is very different between the average US citizen and even though he said he was a New Hampshire citizen, not a US citizen, which is something that I think I want to ask him a little bit more about.
Yep.
Because that to me seems
That
like
speaks to state national.
yeah, that seems like, are you papered up in New Hampshire? And that is different as well. So that's an assumption that American state nationals don't have because of the difference between the de facto and the de jure.
And that didn't even, that, I don't think that question even came up in his journey. He completely addressed the deficiencies and the presumptions that exist within that statutory jurisdiction, which is commercial,
Yep.
from that lens. He did not even come back to bring in that it doesn't apply to me because I'm a state national in the first place.
Right. So truly, going at it from a perspective of sovereignty,
Yes.
the way that the de facto understands sovereignty, right?
Yep.
And incredibly successful, and still, I think, beneficial to both American state nationals and non-American state nationals, people who are still US citizens.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah.
Because it really, I mean, this really highlights how law enforcement applies with a broad brush what does not apply to people. This is a perfect example. It's an example of how words have been weaponized.
Yeah.
How essentially that, like, as he said, using different words, but shoving them together as if they mean the same thing. That terminology that he used,
Right.
That's a perfect example about how so many people think. They think that words don't matter, and that is not true. Words do matter.
Or that the specificity exists to protect people as opposed to ensnare them and confuse them and be able to draw a broad brush across all people. And so that's a difference too. It's a difference in belief system. But he was able to make it work for him.
He absolutely was.
And there are obviously ways to navigate that in such a way, but the precision that is needed, as opposed to saying, you are the de facto, we're the de jure, your rules and regulations in the way that they're written apply to your agents.
Right.
The agents of your de facto government.
Right. And that further really brings home the fact that all of the people that are in that the de facto jurisdiction, US citizens, are considered their own, and they are considered their employees. So therefore, these rules, they think, apply to them. And that's part of the reason why Leos don't know. Not only do they not really know and comprehend the reality of state nationals and the difference in jurisdiction, but they don't even know the nuances in their own jurisdiction.
And the way common law plays out to even protect people then and therefore, right? And even more so with regards to American state nationals being on land and soil, that in that way, shape, or form, it's much more obvious.
It's absolute.
If you're showing a credential card, it's absolute that, if you don't have written on your firearm, on your arm, you don't have it written, but you have your credential card, and you don't have a license, that that is, the difference is absolute, even if the Leo doesn't comprehend the two governments, the two countries, the two jurisdictions that exist, and the way that your land and soil jurisdiction protects you. But the need for comprehending the specificity is critical, because at every turn in the juncture, they are trying to ensnare you, even if the Leos don't know it.
Right.
The way that the laws have been written of the de facto have been written in such a way to ensnare, to utilize the bonds that were created with your birth certificate, to utilize the courts as a money-making scheme and factor. That still exists, whether or not the lawyers seem nice, whether or not the lawyers claim to know or not know. They are all profiting off of every case that comes in.
Right.
They're utilizing those bonds. And so we will get into this, and we'll ask some more specific questions when we have Bear back. Thanks for attending. This is a little bit longer than we were anticipating, but thanks for hanging in there. We hope that this was beneficial to you. Let us know if you have any questions, and we will revisit next week.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Be well.